Welcome. You found your way to Bearbo Reads the Realms, a cozy corner of the world where stories come to life. I'm Bearbo, your storyteller and guide. Welcome back, traveler. I'm glad to see you've returned to the realms to continue our journey. I've added a few logs to the fire, and the winds outside whisper of dragons on the wing. Tonight, we rejoin Flor at Ruatha Hold as the search continues for their next werewoman. So pour yourself something warm, find your favorite spot by the hearth, and settle in. The tale grows deeper with each turning page, and together we'll follow it to wherever it may lead. Chapter 3. Honor those the dragons heed, in thought and favor, word and deed. Worlds are lost or worlds are saved, from those dangers dragon braved. Dragon man, avoid excess. Greed will bring the weird distress. To the ancient laws adhere. Prospers thus the dragon weir. Flor was amused and unamused. This was their fourth day in Fax's company, and only Flor's firm control on self and wing was keeping the situation from exploding into violence. It had been a turn of chance, Flor mused, as Nemnith held his leisurely glide towards the breast path into Rotha that he, Flor, had chosen the high reaches. Fax's tactics would have been successful with Regal, who was very conscious of his honor, or Slane, or Denal, who were too young to have developed much patience or discretion. Slell would have retreated in confusion, a course nearly as disastrous for the weir as combat. He should have correlated the indications long ago. The decay of the weir and its influence did not come solely from the holding lords and their folk. It came also from within the weir, a result of inferior queens and incompetent weirwomen. It came from Regal's inexplicable insistence on not bothering the holds, on keeping dragon men within the weir. And yet, within the weir, there had been too much emphasis on preparations for the games until the internal competition between wings had become the be all and end all of weir activity. The encroachment of grass had not come overnight, nor had the lords awakened one morning recently and decided in a flash not to give all their traditional tithe to the weir. It had happened gradually, and had been allowed by the weir to continue, until the purpose and reason of the weir and dragonkind had reached this low ebb, where an upstart, collateral heir to an ancient hold could be so contemptuous of dragon men and the simple precautions that kept Pern free of threads. Flor doubted that Fax would have attempted such a program of aggression against neighboring holds if the weir had maintained its old prominence. Each hold must have its lord to protect valley and folk from the threads. One hold, one lord, not one lord claiming 7 holds. That was against ancient tradition, and evil besides. For how well can one man protect 7 valleys at once? Man, except for Dragon Man, can only be in one place at a time. And unless a man was dragon mounted, it took hours to get from one hold to another. No wereman of old would have permitted such flagrant disregard of ancient ways. Flor saw the gouts of flame along the barren heights of the pass, and Nemnith obediently altered his glide for a better view. Flor had sent half the wing ahead to the main cavalcade. It was good training for them to skim irregular terrain. He had issued small pieces of firestone with instructions to sear any growth as practice. It would do to remind Fax, as well as his troops, of the awesome ability of dragonkind, a phenomenon the common folk of Pern appeared to have all but forgotten. Fiery phosphine emissions as the dragons belched forth gases showed the pattern well flown. Regal could argue against the necessity of firestone drills. He could cite such incidents as that which had exiled Lytal, but Flor kept the tradition, and so did every man who flew with him, or they left the wing. None failed him. Floor knew the men reveled as much as he did in the fierce joy of riding a flaming dragon. The fumes of phosphine were exhilarating in their own way, and the feeling of power that surged through the man who controlled the might and majesty of a dragon had no parallel in the human experience. Dragon riders were forever men apart once first impression had been made. And to ride a fighting dragon, blue, green, brown, or bronze, was worth the risks, the unending alertness, isolation from the rest of mankind. Nemnith dipped his wings obliquely to slide through the narrow cleft of the pass that led from Fromm to Ruatha. No sooner had they emerged from the cut than the difference between the two holds was patent. Floor was stunned. Through the last 4 holds he had been sure that the end of the search lay within Ruatha. There had been that little brunette whose father was a clothman in the ball, but a tall, willowy girl with enormous eyes, the daughter of a minor warder in Crom, yet these were possibilities, and had Floor been Slell or Knet or Donal, he might have taken the two in as potential mates, although not likely werewomen. But throughout he had reassured himself that the real choice would be found to the south. Now he gazed on the ruin that was Ruatha, his hopes dispersed. Below him, he saw Fax's banner dip in the sequence that requested his presence. Mastering the crushing disappointment he felt, he directed Nemna to descend. Fax, roughly controlling the terrified plunging of his earthbound mount, waved down into the abandoned-looking valley. "Behold great Ruatha, of which you had such hopes," he enjoined sarcastically. Floor smiled coolly back, wondering how Fax had divined that. Had Floor been so transparent when he had suggested searching the other holds? Or was it a lucky guess on Fax's part? "One sees at a glance why goods from the high reaches are now preferred," Floor made himself reply. Nemnith rumbled, and Floor called him sharply to order. Such antipathy in a dragon was most unusual, and no small concern to Floor. Not that he would have had in the least regretted Fax's demise, but not at Nemnith's breath. "Little good comes from Ruatha," Fax said in a voice that was close to a snarl. He jerked sharply at the bridle of his beast, and fresh blood colored the foam on its muzzle. The creature threw its head backward to ease the painful bar in its mouth, and Fax savagely smote it a blow between the ears. The blow, Floor observed, was not intended for the poor, protesting beast, but for the sight of unproductive Ruatha. "I am the Overlord. My proclamation went unchallenged by any of the blood. I am in my rights. Ruatha must pay its tribute to its legal overlord." "On hunger the rest of the year," Floor remarked dryly, gazing out over the wide valley. Few of its fields were plowed. Its pastures supported meager herds. Even its orchards looked stunted. Blossoms that had been so profuse in the trees in Crom, the next valley over, were sparse, as if reluctant to flower in such a dismal a place. Although the sun was well up, there seemed to be no activity in the farm-holds, or none near enough to be observed. The atmosphere was one of sullen despair. "There has been resistance to my rule of Ruatha." Floor shot a look at Fax, for the man's voice was fierce, his face bleak, auguring further unpleasantness for Rothan rebels. The vindictiveness that colored Fax's attitude towards Ruatha and its rebels was tinged with another strong emotion which Floor had been unable to identify, but which had been very apparent to him from the first time he had adroitly suggested this tour of the holds. It could not be fear, for Fax was clearly fearless and obnoxiously self-assured. Revulsion? Dread? Uncertainty? Floor cannot label the nature of Fax's compound reluctance to visit Ruatha, but the man had not relished the prospect, and now reacted violently to being within these disturbing boundaries. "How foolish of the Ruathans," Floor remarked amiably. Fax swung around on him, one hand poised above his sword hilt, eyes blazing. Flar anticipated with a feeling close to pleasure that the usurper Fax might actually draw on a dragon man. He was almost disappointed when the man controlled himself, took a firm hold on the reins of his mount, and kicked it forward to a frantic run. I shall kill him yet, Flar said to himself, and Nemnith spread his wings in concord. Fënor dropped beside his bronze leader. Did I see him about to draw on you? Fënor's eyes were bright, his smile acid. Until he remembered I was mounted on a dragon. Watch him, Bronze Rider. He means to kill you soon. If he can. He's considered a vicious fighter, Fënor advised, his smile gone. Nemnith flapped his wings again, and Flar absently stroked the great soft-skinned neck. I am at some disadvantage, Flar asked, stung by Fënor's words. To my knowledge, no, Fënor said quickly, startled. I have not seen him in action, but I don't like what I have heard. He kills often, with and without a cause. And because we dragonmen do not seek blood, we are not to be feared as fighters? Snapped Flar. Are you ashamed of being what you were bred? I know, Fënor sucked in his breath at the tone of his leader's voice. And others of our wing, no. But there is in that attitude of Fax's men that makes me wish some excuse to fight. As you remarked, we will probably have to fight. There is something here in Ruatha that unnerves our noble overlord. Nemnith, and now Cant, Fënor's brown, extended their wings, flapping to catch their rider's attention. Flar stared as the dragon slew his head back toward his rider, the great eyes gleaming like sun-struck opals. There is a subtle strength in this valley, Flar murmured, gathering the import of the dragon's agitated message. Strength indeed. Even my brown feels it, Fënor replied, his face lighting. Careful, Brown Rider, Flar cautioned. Careful. Send the entire wing aloft. Search this valley. I should have realized. I should have suspected. It was all there to be evaluated. What fools dragon men have become. Chapter 4. The hold is barred, the hall is bare, and men vanish. The soil is barren, the rock is bald, all hope vanish. Lessa was shoveling ashes from the hearth when the agitated messenger staggered into the great hall. She made herself as inconspicuous as possible so the warder would not dismiss her. She had contrived to be sent to the great hall that morning, knowing that the warder intended to brutalize the head clothman for the shoddy quality of the goods ready for the shipment to Fax. Fax is coming! With dragon men! The man gasped as he plunged into the dim great hall. The warder, who had been about to lash the head clothman, turned, stunned, from his victim. The courier, a farmholder from the edge of Ruatha, stumbled up to the warder, so excited with his message that he grabbed the warder's arm. How dare you leave your hold? The warder aimed his lash at the astonished holder. The force of the first blow knocked the man from his feet. Yelping, he scrambled out of reach of the second lashing. Dragon men indeed. Fax! Ah, he shuns Ruatha. There! The warder punctuated each denial with another blow, taking the helpless wretch for good measure, before he turned breathless to glare at the clothman and the two underwarders. How did he get in here with such a threadbare lie? The warder stalked to the great hall door. It was flung open just as he reached for the iron handle. The ashen-faced guard officer rushed in, nearly knocking the warder down. Dragon men! Dragons! All over Ruatha, the man glibbered, arms flailing wildly. He, too, pulled at the warder's arm, dragging the stupefied official towards the outer courtyard to bear out the truth of his statement. Lessa scooped up the last pile of ashes. Picking up her equipment, she slipped out of the great hall. There was a very pleased smile on her face under the screen of matted hair. A dragon man at Ruatha. An opportunity. She must somehow contrive to get Fax so humiliated or so infuriated that he would renounce his claim to the hold in the presence of a dragon man. Then she could claim her birthright. But she would have to be extraordinarily wary. Dragonriders were men apart. Anger did not cloud their intelligence. Greed did not sully their judgment. Fear did not dull their reactions. Let the dense-witted believe human sacrifice, unnatural lusts, insane revels. She was not so gullible, and those stories went against her grain. Dragon men were still human, and there was wereblood in her veins. It was the same color blood as that of anyone else. Enough of hers had been spilled to prove that. She halted for a moment, catching a sudden shallow breath. Was this the danger she had sensed 4 days ago at dawn? The final encounter in her struggle to regain the hold? No, Lessa cautioned herself. There is more to that portent than revenge. The ash bucket banged against her shins as she shuffled down the low-ceilinged corridor to the stable door. Fax would find a cold welcome. She had laid no new fire on the hearth. Her laugh echoed back unpleasantly from the damp walls. She rested her bucket and propped her broom and shovel as she wrestled with the heavy bronze door that gave into the new stables. They had been built outside the cliff of Ruatha by Fax's first warder, a subtler man than all 8 of his successors. He had achieved more than all the others, but Lessa had honestly regretted the necessity of his death. But he would have made her revenge impossible. He would have found her out before she had learned how to camouflage herself and her little interferences. What had been his name? She could not recall. Well, she regretted his death. The second man had been properly greedy, and it had been easy to set up a pattern of misunderstanding between the warder and the craftsman. That one had been determined to squeeze all profit from Ruatha goods so that some of it would drop into his pocket before Fax expected a shortage. The craftsman who had begun to accept the skillful diplomacy of the first warder bitterly resented the second's grasping, high-handed ways. They resented the passing of the old line, and even more so, the way of its passing. They were unforgiving of the insult to Ruatha, its now secondary position in the high reaches, and they resented the individual indignities that holders, craftsmen, and farmers alike suffered under the second warder. It took little manipulation to arrange for matters at Ruatha to go from bad to worse. The second was replaced, and his successor fared no better. He was caught diverting goods, the best of the goods at that. Fax had had him executed. His bony head still rolled around in the main fire pit above the great tower. The present incumbent had not been able to maintain the holding in even the sorry condition in which he had assumed its management. Seemingly simple matters developed rapidly into disasters, like the production of cloth. Contrary to his boast to Fax, the quality had not improved, and the quantity had fallen off. Now Fax was here, and with dragon men. Why dragon men? The import of the question froze Lessa, and the heavy door closing behind her barked at her heels painfully. Dragon men used to be frequent visitors at Ruatha. That she knew and even vaguely remembered. Those memories were like a harper's tale, told of someone else, not something within her own experience. She had limited her fierce attention to Ruatha only. She could not even recall the name of queen or werewoman of the instructions of her childhood, nor could she recall hearing mention of any queens or werewomen by anyone in the hold these past 10 turns. Perhaps the dragon men were finally going to call the lords of holds to task for the disgraceful show of greenery about the holds. Well, Lessa was to blame for much of that in Ruatha. but she defied even a dragon man to confront her with her guilt. If all Ruatha fell to the threads, it would be better than remaining dependent to facts. The hearsay shocked Lessa, even as she thought it. Wishing she could easily unburden her conscience of such blasphemy, she ditched the ashes into the stable midden. There was a sudden change in the air pressure around her. Then a fleeting shadow caused her to glance up. From behind the cliff above glided a dragon, its enormous wings spread to their fullest as he caught the morning updraft. Turning effortlessly, he descended. A second, a third, full wing of dragons followed in soundless flight and patterned descent, graceful and awesome. The klaxon rang belatedly from the tower. From within the kitchen there issued the screams and shrieks of terrified drudges. Lessa took cover. She ducked into the kitchen, where she was instantly seized by the assistant cook and thrust with a buffet and a kick towards the sinks. She was put to scrubbing the grease-crusted serving utensils with cleansing sand. The yelping canines were already lashed to the spit run, turning a scrawny herd beast that had been set to roast. The cook was ladling seasonings on the carcass, swearing at having to offer so poor a meal to so many guests, some of them of high rank. Winter-dried fruits from the last scanty harvest had been set to soak, and two of the oldest drudges were scraping roots to be boiled. An apprentice cook was kneading bread, and another carefully spicing a sauce. Looking fixedly at him, Lessa diverted his hand from one spice box to a less appropriate one as he gave a final shake to the concoction. She innocently added too much wool to the wall oven to ensure the rum of the breads. She controlled the canines deftly, slowing one and speeding the other, so that the meat would be underdone on one side, burned on the other. That the feast should result in fast, with the food presented found inedible, was her whole intention. Above, in the hold, she had no doubt that certain other measures, undertaken at a different time for this exact contingency, were being discovered. Her fingers bloodied from a beating. One of the warder's women came shrieking into the kitchen, hopeful of refuge there. Insects have eaten the best blankets to shreds, and a canine who had littered on the best linen snarled at me as she gave suck. And the rushes are noxious, and the best chambers full of debris driven in by the winter wind. Someone left the shutters ajar. Just a tiny bit, but it was enough, the woman wailed, clutching her hand to her breast and rocking back and forth. Lessa bent with great industry to shine the plates. My friend, what a couple chapters that was. Pieces are beginning to fall into place now. The storm is gathering on the horizon, though most have yet to see it. But you and I, we can feel it, can't we? Thank you for resting here with me tonight, and for sharing the magic of this story by the fire's glow. Until next time, traveler, keep your heart light, your tea warm, and your dreams full of adventure. I'll be waiting by the fire.